Hey everyone, so for today we're going to talk about how to use 2 points now to write and graph an equation. So we have our first example of 3 problems I'm going to show you how to do today. We have our first point is 6, 1 and -3, -5. Now I have this here graph sheet. Part of your assignment is going to be to graph these 2 points so that you can see where that graph goes. So I've got my graph here, and we said that the point is 6, 1, and then we have -3, -5. So I need to graph those 2 points. So for my first problem here, we're going to go 6x, 1y. So we go over 6 and up 1. So that's our first point. And our second point says we go -3, -5. So those are our 2 points. We want to connect them with our line. And when you do this during your Delta Math assignment, it will automatically put the line in after you've placed both points. So we've placed the points. Now we need to figure out what this graph is actually for an equation. So we have a couple of ways we can do it. We can either use the graph we've created, or we can use the points. I'm going to first start off by showing you with this example how to use the points to write an equation. And for the next one, I'll show you how we can use the graph to write an equation. So for this first one here, we said we want to use the points. So the first thing I need to do is find my slope. And from our last lesson, we said slope is the change in y over the change in x. So I take my y2 and my y1 and subtract them. So I have -5 minus 1, and my x2 and subtract my x1, -3 minus 6. Now, -5 minus 1 would give me a -6, and -3 minus 6 would give me a -9. Now, negative over negative will make this a positive fraction, and 6 over 9, I can simplify this fraction to be 2/3, because 3 goes into both of those. So if I divide 6 by 3, I get 2, and if I divide 9 by 3, I get 3. So we have our slope. This helps us with our equation, because now we want to say y equals 2/3 x plus b. We want to use our slope-intercept form of an equation, which is y equals mx plus b. We found our slope, so we can plug that in. Now, in order to figure out what b is, that's the next part I need to find, I'm going to pick one of these points and plug that in. I like the point 6, 1 because I don't have to deal with negatives. So let's do 1 for y, and then we have our 2/3 times 6 plus b. Well, 2/3 times 6 would give me 4. And to get b by itself, I subtract 4 from both sides. So I get b equals 1 minus 4, which is -3. So I would say that my equation for this one is y equals 2/3 x minus 3. So Delta Math is going to have 2 parts. It's going to have you do the graph of those 2 points to see the line. And it's going to have you write the equation for the line. So this would be how you can algebraically solve to find the equation for your graph. But now for this next one, for our second example problem here. So we said for our next example, we're going to use 6, 8, and 2, -2. So we want to try and graph this using the points. So I have 2, -2, over 2, down 2, and then over 6 and up 8. Now these points are pretty far away from each other, so I'm going to use a ruler so I get the exact points here. As close as I can anyway. All right, so sometimes we might get a graph that doesn't quite look like it's hitting the exact intersect of some of these points, right? Like it's just a little off on those different parts. So what we can do instead, we said the first thing in our other example was we wanted to find the slope. So I still want to find the slope. And we said slope is rise overrun. In other words, it's how far up and down does my graph go and how far left and right do I go to get from the first point to the second point. So first, let's do our rise. I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this was 10 spaces, and this was over 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I know that my slope needs to be positive because my graph is continuously going up as it moves to the right. So my slope is 10 over 4. In other words, though, I can simplify that down to 5 over 2. Since we know that our slope is going to be 5 over 2, we can try and see if we can't get this to come down and find our y-intercept. So we would come down and we would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then left 1, 2. So this point here would be our intercept, and we are down at -7. I have all the parts I need to write the equation for this graph. I know that we want to write this in y equals mx plus b form. And we found our slope, that was 5/2, so y equals 5/2 x. And this y-intercept is the b part of my equation, so we would write -7. That is the final answer for graphing these equations and writing their equation out. Now, for our last example, this one gets to be a little bit tricky. So I want you to give this one a try before I show you how to do it. So you can pause the video now. All right, hopefully you paused the video and you gave yourself some time to solve this problem and see if you can't write out the equation. First, I need to plot these points, and so my points are 2, -8, -2, -8. And when I plot these points on my graph, I come +2, down 8. And I do the same thing, -2, -8. So if I were to make the graph, draw my line in here, gets down there pretty far, but that's okay. One thing you should hopefully notice about this graph is that it creates a straight line that is parallel. In other words, it goes the same distance or the same direction as my x-axis. That means that this is actually a special kind of graph. There are two different types of graphs that we haven't really talked about. There is a graph that has the slope of 0, so when m is 0. And there's another type where m, our slope, is undefined. There's a couple of ways you can know if the slope is going to be 0 or if it's going to be undefined and how to tell the difference. Normally, when I look at my points, if the y is the same, I have both -8s there. If the y is the same, if y is same, m is 0. Because that's telling me that my y never changes. There is no change in y. Therefore, my slope does not change my graph. However, if we want to find when our slope is undefined, that's when our x is the same. X is same, the slope is undefined. Or you sometimes just abbreviate that to UND, the college that I attended. Great place to be. So when our x is the same, or if this had been -2, -2, or any other same number, then we would have an undefined slope because our graph would actually create a vertical line. And the reason why that slope is undefined is because this equation actually does not have any solutions. In other words, it's not a true function. It doesn't pass what we call that vertical line test. Basically, the reason why this is considered undefined is because to find our slope, we would have to divide by 0. And if you ask Siri on your phones, she will give you a long explanation of why you can't divide by 0. It just doesn't work. How do I divide something into 0 groups? It just doesn't work. Numbers don't work that way. So 0 versus undefined. We know our graph is a 0 slope because we have a horizontal line, or our y's in our 2 points are the same. So that makes this easy. If m equals 0, well, 0 is going to be my slope, so we have y equals 0x plus b. And if I want to solve for b, I can plug in any of these points, and it's not going to matter because I'll do this first one here. If I use -8 and I plug in 2 for x, I have 0 times 2 plus b. Well, 0 times anything is going to give me 0. So this really just says -8 is b. So for my final equation, we'd plug that in. Y equals 0x minus 8. However, for these equations, when we have 0, if it's for our slope or if it's for our intercept, we would just say y equals -8. If this had been an undefined equation, though, that means that y-axis is never crossed. So our equation isn't going to be y equals, but it would say x equals. X equals 7, x equals 25, whatever it might be. So when we have an undefined, our equation would be x equals something. But for this problem, our equation is just y equals -8. So now you should have watched the video, tried out some examples. I have a few problems posted on Delta Math for you to give this a try with. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email, shoot me a message, and I will help you out in any way that I can.